Just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover. So just before I go into the devil of the detail this morning, I'm going to give a brief overview on CFC underwriting and who CFC are, because I think that adds weight to the kind of numbers and statistics you're going to see this morning. We're then going to look at what a claims response looks like from ourselves in terms of the cyberspace and cyber products that you purchase. We're then going to look at some of the claims statistics which sit behind that, what we see on an annual basis, both from a frequency and severity perspective. And we're then going to move on, look at some buyer considerations for yourselves as purchasers, and finally finish up with 3 sort of detailed case studies really. These are anonymised SMEs within the UK. What we've done is pull together the detail of those claims. So what that looked like from the customer's perspective, how they interacted with us, how that claim played out, and the kind of numbers that then sit behind the settlements of the claims itself. So you get a full understanding of what that full cycle process looks like. So hopefully that will be the entirety of the presentation this morning. I'll just give you a brief overview of my background. So I've only been at CFC since last May, but I've been working in financial lines for the last 10 years. Cyber's obviously been something which has come to the forefront really, I would say more in the last 5, but as we'll see this morning, there are plenty of insurers out there who've now been providing cyber coverage for a long time. So I work as part of our international underwriting team at CFC. That's made up of 10 underwriters who service UK brokers and UK clients like yourselves. We are actually part of a wider team, so we have 50 underwriters at CFC who deal purely with cyber risks on a day in, day out basis, who sit alongside a wider claims team of roughly about 10 to 15 individuals alongside that. So I'll go on to talk a bit more about CFC. So these are some numbers that sit behind CFC. So I'm sure a lot of you probably won't have heard of CFC as a company. We don't have advertising on television, for example, or online or on billboards. But CFC are in the top 3 global providers for cyber insurance. If you're looking there at the 150 million, sorry, apologies, the numbers in dollars, but we're one of the biggest places of cyber insurance, as I say, globally. That's backed up by the numbers I was giving you there around our underwriting and claims personnel. Those are the largest, both dedicated underwriting teams and dedicated claims teams under one roof for cyber insurance globally. So we keep all our expertise in one office in London. The reason we do that is because the claims data that we receive back drives and innovates our products. We've just released a new update of our product in January of this year. Prior to that, the last update was about 18 months prior. This is obviously a space that moves very quickly. We've looked at a lot of the technical details this morning. Hopefully you'll get more of an idea of that from some of the claims statistics we'll see in a minute as well. So I'm part of a team who deal with being part of our international team. It's every country bar the US where we've got a dedicated team. So we deal with placing insurance or underwriting insurance in over 60 countries globally. And again, I think what you'll see as we go through the presentation is it holds weight to the proposition, because we're not just looking at trends in the UK, we're looking at trends across territories, which is what we need to do when we're considering cyber risk, because it doesn't confine itself to one territory. So it's important for us, therefore, to really see and understand trends, where risks are arising from, exposures for yourself as customers, and for us then to innovate the products in the right way. So we have been writing cyber insurance for about 20 years. It was really the reason the company was put together, and more than 1 in 2 of each policy we issue is actually a cyber insurance policy. So it's really at the heart of what the business does. We insure, so we've got the statistic up there, we insure 40,000 businesses globally, and those businesses will range from the really small end of SME, right up to multi-billion pound companies that are listed on the stock exchange, for example. The product is not the same for each and every one, but we tailor the product to the needs of the customer and size of the customer, which I'll hopefully give you a bit of an idea of along the way. So I think that's sort of the background around the numbers of CFC. It's probably worth saying, actually, sorry, that 40,000 global customers actually equates to 10,000 here in the UK. And in the last 12 months, we grew that book of business by 110%, mainly because of the need and want of customers in that space. And we're predicted to see that kind of growth again this year. So I'd like to cover off, first of all, I think what's really at the hub of particularly CFC cyber proposition, and it's around the claims and incident response side of the business and what that looks like for you. So, sorry, just to move forward. So we've got some statistics here, first of all. So this is looking at our financial years 2017 and 2018, and just looking at the pure volumes of claims that we're dealing with. As you can see, looking at those lines, that claims volume has more than doubled between those two financial years. Now, although our business here in the UK grew by 110%, as I said, we haven't grown as a business over 100% in that period. So what you're seeing is an increase in the frequency of claims. And if we move on just to the next slide, albeit very hard to make out, but the actual frequency per customer is increasing as well. So where cyber criminals and hackers are finding vulnerabilities with yourselves as customers or on IT networks, what they're doing is exposing them and then repeating their tricks in quick succession 2, 3, 4 times to really maximize the output they can get from you. And that can be in a number of ways. That can be through the data that you hold. It can be through the money that you have in the business and transfer out and comes into you. They're generally after those intangible assets which are at the core of your business and make up your livelihoods. So these are the statistics from our financial year ending 2018. So we run from October to September. So these statistics were collated at the end of last September. Now, I obviously gave you the details earlier of the numbers around the customer levels that we have. So in total, what we're looking at here is a breakdown of roughly 1,150 claims. So if in one hand I tell you that we have 40,000 global customers and we've seen 1,150 claims and we're one of the largest providers of cyber insurance globally, you're probably looking at that thinking, well, that's not very much. And that roughly equates to about 3%, in terms of penetration rate of the claims that we see. But when you start looking at the breakdown of claims, and obviously I've spoken about the fact that we're seeing an increase in frequency, there are some real common trends underlying. I think some which Jodie touched upon earlier, actually. So if you're looking at the frequency side here and the 3 largest segments, the largest one there is actually cybercrime, which is really looking at the money you hold as a business when you're transferring that money out, whether someone's going into your accounts and physically breaking in and taking that money from the business, or whether that's your clients as well also transferring funds to you for the services and products that you provided. The crime element of the policy that we have extends far beyond that to cover things like corporate identity theft, funds of directors and officers. But the key, I think the key area is where you're holding funds and where you're transferring it. Those are the weak points. And Jodie spoke about human error earlier and where people are getting into your accounts and manipulating details in terms of invoicing, asking you to send across payments, etc. These are crucial areas around crime and areas where the use of things like dual authentication for transfers of funds or where details are changed in those bank accounts are vitally important. The second largest area there is ransomware, and I think if you look at that and then you flip that over to the severity side, we'll come on to in a bit some really detailed claims examples where I think that comes to fruition and you get kind of more of an idea as to why that's such a severity-driven area for the business. So ransomware, as Jodie spoke about, anywhere where you receive a link, you can click it, it downloads that malware and locks your whole system and network down. So effectively putting you out of action for a specific period. Ransomware is developing. it has been, or previously has been, you'd get a link, click it, and you'd be dealing maybe with one third-party hacker. We're now seeing the evolution of that, and what we're seeing is ransomware in forms where you're looking at multiple hackers and layers of encryption. So you might decrypt one layer and find out actually beneath it you've basically got a Russian doll effect, which you're unpacking. And those layers, you end up dealing with multiple hackers in that as well. They're actually corroborating to make it far difficult for yourselves as customers to undo that. Another area, so data breach, just to touch on that. So that's, as Jodie spoke about earlier, the physical files, where you're leaving paper files or USB sticks, laptops anywhere. Where a data breach is caused by that, as opposed to the third party actually hacking into your system and finding a vulnerability that way. So again, you can see a significant proportion of the wheel in that sense. Just looking at it overall though, the two underlying pieces of this that I'd like to touch on really are over 50% of the claims that we see arise from what we would label as cybercrime. So you can see there already the actual crime and ransomware parts, which we would both label as crime. So crime is a vitally important part of the policy. CFC, our product proposition, is one that combines cyber and privacy coverage and crime. Other insurers out there will separate the two. We see cyber as being a criminal act, and our policy reflects that. So hopefully as we go through, I can kind of give you more details as to that in terms of the coverage, and take any questions you've got around what that actually looks like for you. And the other area which I think we've kind of touched on is, again, looking at that wheel. If you're looking at the human error part, it is about 65 to 70%. So whether it's transfer of funds and people not realizing it's going to the wrong account, whether it's ransomware clicking on links, or whether it again is the loss of those physical files. So those would be the two common trends I'd really pull out for you. And that's, as I say, not just UK wise, that's globally. That's where we see that see the details arising from. Apologies. So now we'll move on to looking a bit more at our actual incident response team and claims team that sits behind the product for you. So this is an image or a set of mugshots for you of our claims and incident response team. The reason I want to talk about them is to give you and sort of bring to life what that looks like for a customer in the event that they suffer a claim. So the individuals, sorry, I'll try and ring fence them for you. So these, it's actually these four individuals. No, it's not, sorry. It's actually these 6 individuals here, apologies, that act as part of our incident response team. Appreciate Ash and Harry have slightly different titles on there. What that means is that when you suffer a claim as a customer, those individuals can be in contact with you within about 15 minutes. Whether you notify us over the phone or email, or actually CFC provides a claimed app, which you can download after you purchase a policy and notify us that way. Many people choose not to do that, however. However, those individuals are on the end of the phone. And what I want to do is kind of give you a bit of background to their experience and what that looks like for you. So those individuals are highly technical and will effectively look to try and diagnose the extent of the issue, whether it's a hack into the system and therefore there are vulnerabilities. If it's a ransomware event, not just knowing it's a ransomware event, but understanding what strain of malware it is. Because that's vitally important in terms of the next steps and what we look to do moving the business forward. Or whether it's a data breach, at which point we may need to also get involved other panel providers that we have. So not all claims are dealt with purely by these individuals. We have a panel of expertise also sitting behind us. And that ranges from IT security and forensics to the legal side of things, if we required. After a data breach to notify, like the ICO, and also the individuals involved. So it just gives you a bit of an idea as to not just what they look like, but their kind of level of expertise. Some of these individuals have actually worked for the police or UK crime agencies. So they've sat, I would think, in a similar position to Jodie and sort of seen that side of things. And they've now chosen to use their expertise from an insurance perspective and provide that technical expertise to yourselves as customers. Those guys are the ones who are the first port of call and are dealing with those 1,150 claims annually. They're roughly dealing with about 3 to 4 claims per day. and that's increasing steadily as we go. So it just gives you a kind of idea as to what that looks like. Sitting behind them, or once you purchase a policy, I'd just like to talk through some of the risk management tools that you get by purchasing a policy to give you a kind of idea as to what's out there and how it will help you. Previously, I don't know if any of you are already CFC policyholders, but we had a vast online portal where you had so many tools, both physical in terms of hard drives, or offering antivirus software, offering templates for business continuity plans. It was extensive, and what we've done is reviewed that and really looked to drag that back to the core areas that where claims arise from, and actually the tools that will add value for you. So the first one on the list is a form of phishing simulation and training software. We spoke about the human error thread that runs through cyber claims as a whole, and this looks to address that. So this is a piece of software which can centrally be managed and effectively allow you to issue out correspondence to employees for you to then track what they click, and basically therefore afterwards provide training and awareness for them. So it's one of the biggest areas where we see claims arising from, as we spoke about earlier, and you saw with the ransomware, or the severity wheel, how high ransomware is in terms of its effect on businesses. So it's important to address that area. So that's provided by, I believe that's provided by CrowdStrike actually, amongst the panel providers you can see there on your right. The next one down is a cyber risk rating report and monitoring. What does that look like? So this is provided to us by BitSight. It basically looks at the business's overall footprint online and will give you a rough assessment as to where you lie in comparison to other peers in your sector of the same size. So not companies who are 10 times bigger than you, who may have bigger budgets to implement better IT infrastructure. It's really a peer-to-peer assessment for you. So that is quite a basic report. If, for example, you wanted to look at something more detailed, we can actually employ the services of an ethical hacker to really look at a more well-rounded sort of pen test for the business as well. So we do have services that we can offer over and above the ones that are there. The next one down is cyber risk awareness videos. These are provided to us actually by a company that's not listed on there, but you can see them on YouTube. It's a company called Ningio. So Ningio provide an array of videos, and again, a lot of them are around sort of phishing and general email etiquette, inboxes, etc., and just trying to keep you abreast of any developments in terms of trends and claims, and they then produce that into a format which is digestible for employees. Those videos come in various formats, to more well-rounded formal ones, to something a bit more humorous on almost the cartoon side. So they can be delivered in a number of formats for you. We've also got access to incident response and business continuity plans. They will range from a 2-page incident response plan for the business, where you just have to input a handful of details and you've got something there good to go in the event that there is a data breach, for example, right the way up to more complex and bespoke business continuity plans, where they're more detailed forms, they require more input from yourself. And we can work again on a more bespoke basis with you as well, if you feel there's a reason that the business requires that, to put something together that fits your business and both ourselves from an incident response perspective and the way you tie in with us. And lastly, the breach monitoring. So Jody very briefly touched on the dark web. So RepNight provide a post-breach monitoring service for us, and allow you to get feedback instantaneously as to any details that have been leaked online of the business, both personal, individuals, or company, in terms of commercially sensitive. So those tools are particularly helpful. They can all be accessed by this management support inbox that we have. So once policy's purchased, all you have to do is drop a quick email to that email address, and those details of those tools will drop across to you within about 24 hours. Apologies. So I talked a bit about cybercrime. Some of the biggest areas listed upon there. I won't talk in too much detail because I think we've covered off a lot of them actually. CEO fraud earlier. One I will talk about is phishing of customers. So not yourself, it would be your clients. So there are not every insurance provider out in the UK will provide push payment fraud cover, which is effectively your clients trying to transfer funds to you. So if they're hacked and they're unaware their system has been breached, and they transfer funds and think they're transferring it to you, but it never makes it to you because of that manipulation of invoices or bank account details. The technical term for that is push payment fraud. It is something provided under the policy coverage for ourselves. The reason it's beneficial is because we've seen cases where there can be nothing wrong from your perspective as a business. However, that third party has transferred the funds. They believe it's actually been settled to you. And what we then see is a scenario roll out where that third party brings litigation against you as a business. Apologies. And so that coverage is really provided to mitigate that circumstance, to avoid that happening. And it's certainly quite a unique area of coverage out there in the UK market at present. It's the reason it's not, so the policy coverage for that is up to a £50,000 limit. It's not offered to full limit. The reason being is because effectively we're underwriting you as a customer, not also your customer base as well. But we do feel provides extreme value in obviously mitigating circumstances like that. Electronic manipulation. So I won't cover that because on the next slide, actually, if we move on. So looking at the product considerations, so I'll just bring these all up for you. Just a few areas, I guess, to be aware of as purchasers of the insurance or if you're thinking about purchasing. Firstly, whether cybercrime is in the wording. So I've spoken at length about how much it makes up the base of claims that we see. It's important to understand the extent of that coverage as well and what warranties may potentially be in the wording to affect your business in terms of the processes you undertake and the procedures. So understanding that, I would say, is a vital part of purchasing the coverage. The next point down, so not just electronic compromise. So there are a few policies out there now which trigger on this. Most should go beyond that, but it might just be worth bearing that in mind. So the policies. There are policies out there like ourselves that offer coverage where it extends beyond just electronic email compromise, for example, phishing we spoke about earlier, or smishing as well, or Jodie mentioned. So it's important to make sure those areas are actually covered within the policy. They're not all encompassing at the minute across the UK. There are differences both in terms of the terminology and the extent of the coverage out there. I've spoken about warranties from a cybercrime perspective, but warranties overall. Lots of providers will ask you a number of risk management questions up front. Those questions, I would think in almost all circumstances, will tie back in the event of a claim. So it's really important that the information that's given is complete and accurate. From our perspective, CFC approach SME insurance in the UK, so we would deem that as under 50 million revenue. We underwrite on an exposure basis. What that means is that we don't ask the risk management questions up front. We look at the claims trends that we see, and we look at yourselves as clients, and we assess and price the risk accordingly based on the claims, your sector of business, the limit you're requesting, and the revenue of the business overall. So that's how we look to approach it for businesses at that level. And I've mentioned there already about push payment fraud. Apologies. So now we move on to a look at 3 particular case studies and a bit more detail as to what happened with these clients. As I say, they're all anonymized, so there's no specifics involved, but we do give the details of the sectors they're in. So the first example, the backup breakdown, is an engineering firm, if I remember rightly, and it looks at basically their trust in their outsourced IT provider and what happened to them following getting caught up in the WannaCry events of 2017. So we'll cover that off. Legacy system Letdown is a contracting firm. Actually, I believe that's an electrical engineering firm. And this looks at what I was talking about earlier, that impact of a ransomware event and really how severe the sort of business interruption can be. And actually not necessarily, I think, from systems you might think are not that important to the business. So we'll cover that off. And finally, the last one is an online retailer in the UK, providing medical products and accessories. And again, that looks and sort of focuses on the business interruption part of the policy and how after an event it impacted their customer base and what that looked like for them. So we'll go and have a look at those details in a bit more depth for you. So the first one was a very, very small engineering firm in the UK, 4 employees, and with a revenue of about £500,000. This claim occurred in May 2017, and they were a firm who, because of their size, employed an IT provider to not just host their systems, but host their applications, and trusted them in terms of providing backups for them as well. This client got caught up in the WannaCry ransomware event. Unfortunately, had clicked a link, as is easily done, as we've spoken about, and that set about encrypting both the initial system where it was deployed and the wider network, albeit not a huge and extensive one in this instance. So in that instance, the client looked to assess the issue, looked to see if they could solve the problem themselves, but realised very quickly that it wasn't something that was going to be within their level of expertise. It's at that point they spoke to their IT provider and looked to see what they could manage to do for them. The IT provider, however, wasn't accustomed to seeing many ransomware events at that stage, and so felt that was beyond their level of expertise. But what they did offer to do is look to restore the business from their backups. So what they asked them to do was effectively look to shut down the systems, isolate the issue, and what they would do was cleanse the systems and then therefore restore from the latest backup point. What they didn't envisage was when they went to check those backups, what they should have known as the IT provider was that actually hadn't been tested for a period of in excess of 12 months. And as a result of that, those backups had failed over that period. The devil in the detail of this one is that with an engineering company and with what they do, a lot of the work is design based. It's not just paper files, it's not just notes, and that design work actually took a lot of man hours to recreate. So that claim, as you can see there, totaled in excess of £200,000, but actually totaled a significant number of man hours as well to actually redo that design work. And as part of that claim, not just redoing the design work, but there's obviously slowdown in the current contracts, and we have to factor in as well any issues that could arise out of cancelled contracts. So fortunately, there wasn't any in this example, but it's important to understand that all those aspects do form part of the claim that would have been covered for the client. This claim is actually, although we've settled currently £200,000 in terms of restoring those drawings and design work to allow them to continue as a business, and the loss of revenue, there is now a claim going back against the IT provider for obviously their negligence in the services provided. So one of the common I think comebacks that we face is that because all of those services are outsourced, that there won't be an issue. I think this example provides a good idea that can happen. And actually, what would happen if that IT provider doesn't have those backups to hand? How long is that effectively going to put the company out of business for, as was the case here? So legacy system letdown. So this is an example of an electrical contracting firm, a little bit larger than the previous one, but it did start in the same way. So again, it was a phishing email that they've clicked the link of. So you can see a common theme here arising. This took place about July last year, and the timescales are quite interesting on this one. So they managed to notify us quite quickly as soon as they realised that obviously the systems had been locked down. They didn't try to solve the issue themselves. They actually notified us within 24 hours, which is great. That's ultimately what our incident response team are there for, to diagnose the problem and to work as quickly as possible to help. So we actually managed to work with them to pay the ransom for the hacker, and unencrypt the files when we realised that there weren't any feasible backups in this example. So yeah, we do work with the third-party hackers at times. We will work on a case-by-case basis, and we will log as well over time who actually does give us the keys to unencrypt the files and who doesn't, because it can often be the case that you can pay a ransom and that doesn't happen. In this instance, it did. Within 4 days, we actually had all the systems unencrypted, so all the software loaded back on, all the files to hand. And it's at that point that most insurers would kind of close the file and go, brilliant, that's job done. That wasn't the case for this client, and hopefully the detail here will give you a bit more of an understanding as to why these events are particularly severe. So the client had all the details back, but the issues they began to see. So their logging system for job lots and invoicing, although it had come back, reports were taking far longer to load. Something that should have been there instantaneously within seconds was suddenly taking up to minutes to 10 minutes at a time. So loading up reports was getting longer and longer. And actually it was, as this went on, more and more manpower was required to actually keep the business running to the levels it was at before. So this went on for about a month before we realised actually that this wasn't closed off as a claim for the client, that this actually was now at a point where the business was gradually grinding to a halt. They were starting to not be able to see what money was coming into their business, what money was going out. And at that point, they're really suffering in terms of understanding how they can go forward with contracts, taking payment from their customers, and as I say, really sort of slowing the business down. This come about because of, as detailed up there, the piece of software that they were using for job lots and invoicing and accounting was actually what we label as a legacy piece of software. So it was a piece of software which there are no viable updates out there for anymore. So it's not something which you can improve, patch, and therefore get back up and running. As a result of that, you can sort of see both the man hours that were put into the manual data re-entry side, as well as the costs both for that and then for the ransom involved as well. That's not one of the largest claims we've paid at all in this area, but hopefully it gives you an idea of just a simple click of a button, how that can elaborate out and spin off into a large claim and the delays that can then cause the business. So I spoke there about when we'd unencrypted the files, that was 4 days. A month down the line, that actually then the business realizes their system slowed down. It actually played out far longer than that to actually then rectify the issue with the systems. What we had to do was basically upgrade the client's accounting or software so they had a newer version, something more efficient for them moving forward, and allowed them to actually move at the pace they were moving before. So that was a crucial part of it as well. A key part just to focus on there, just before I move on to the very last claim for you, is the data recreation or re-entry. Some policies out there purely provide data reconstitution. What that means for you is that it will purely allow you to access your backups. So I've spoken about 2 examples already where the backups have failed. So if that's the extent of the policy coverage, then it leaves you having to fork into your own pockets in terms of paying out the rekeying and employing additional staff to actually cover that off. So finally, the example of the online retailer. So this is a particularly good example because it focuses on the reputational harm aspect of the business interruption cover under the policy. So we spoke a lot about in the last example, getting the business back up and running and the impact that has. But what about if all of a sudden clients start to effectively fall off, which is what happened in this example. So this client's website on their online retail hub was overloaded in terms of attacks on it, and it effectively crippled it to a point where they were no longer functioning. There was a vulnerability in their network, and they were then made to realise from correspondence from the hacker that actually not only was the website down, but actually the hacker had got access to a significant number of data records. They weren't aware at that time what they were, but later became aware that it was payment card information. So something we would deem as more sensitive and of higher risk, because that can be obviously used far easier. They tried to solve this one themselves. So for a week, they didn't notify us, and it was only when they got a second email through saying, effectively asking for a ransom at that stage for the details that the hacker had in their hands, that they then employed or then got in contact with us to seek advice as to the best way forward. Due to the delay, but also what had been stolen from them at that time, which was 90,000 credit card details. What we saw was, you can see the figure there that was racked up in the first instance for the first part of the claim, which was the forensics to understand where the third party had been on the insured system. It's vitally important to know what they've accessed so that we can notify affected individuals if they've had access to their details, and to know also if they're still residing on the network. Along with that, there's obviously legal advice because it was a data breach in this example, so ICO notification as well as the affected individuals come into it. With the notification part, it's worth me just saying that it will depend upon the individual as to the cost involved. If, for example, there are older individuals amongst those affected, they may need to be notified by post as opposed to email. You can notify by email, so I think there are some places out there which may say different to that, but that's not the case. But that does have an impact on the actual costs involved. And as you can see, so £175,000 in the first instance. That was then without actually moving forward, and then the effects on the business thereafter. So due to having to notify those individuals affected, they then start to see a drop off in customers, and not just a few, 65,000 customers. Bearing in mind this is medical treatments and accessories retailer whose average sort of cost or transaction cost was somewhere around the £20 to £30 mark. So it's a significant number. What we then had to do was employ a forensic accountant to sit there and look at the new customers they had prior to the incident, the customers that they had after, and it was really a case of matching up individual transaction to transaction to understand who were repeat customers, understand the drop-off in those customers, and as well identify the average transaction so that we could start putting a value to actually the loss and the impact on the business. So that's quite a time-consuming piece in itself. I think the last part I'd just like to touch on with that claim, as I spoke about, reputational harm was key to it. There are some policies out there in the market which restricts cover to 3 months. In this example with this customer, if they had coverage which only extended to that limit, we wouldn't have seen the tail end effect of what I've discussed there. And actually it would have left them with a significant shortfall, as you can see. So again, hopefully all areas that are noted and will be considered in terms of coverage. It just gives you more of an idea again as to the exposures faced from not necessarily businesses, as we spoke about the last one, a contracting business where obviously your network isn't first and foremost in terms of your day-to-day activities, but just the crippling effect that had on that business. So just some key points just to sort of reiterate. I think I've talked a lot about them. The human error part is still a significant piece, and that's why insurance holds its weight at present. There is a lot of weight as well within cybersecurity and the effect of the cost that you can have in building your infrastructure. But as I say, in terms of the claims we see and being one of the largest aggregators of that data globally, I would enforce that message that a lot of that arises from human error. Business interruption claims. So obviously 12 months back, if we were looking at this month, GDPR was such a significant piece on the horizon. And a lot of that legislation focuses our minds on data that you hold, data breaches, and what that looks like in terms of protecting yourself as a business. What I would say is that I've spoken about crime, but also ransomware and the effects that has on business. GDPR obviously only focuses on one element of that, and it's important to understand the extent that cyber coverage is giving you and protection it's giving you to your businesses. So it's expertise that's at the end of the phone for you in that moment. The next point, I think I've just covered off. And what we're seeing at the moment is cybercrime's not. Cyber criminals certainly don't discriminate by industry or size. What we are seeing with ransomware events, is worth just saying, is that some more specific attacks are happening on companies. They're focusing more on companies with larger funds at hand, but also that take their interest. And what we're seeing is that the extortion demands increase as a result of that. So previously, where we saw NotPetya and WannaCry, that were far-reaching events where the ransoms being requested sometimes were a couple of £100 or dollars. What we're now seeing is businesses being targeted, and the extortion demands far more significant, into tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds. So that's just worth leaving as a footnote for you as well. Hopefully that was useful this morning. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them, or afterwards. Yes.
In your legacy example, am I right in thinking that the cover provided that the actual legacy system was replaced?
Yes, that's right.
If so, is that a standard cover? Because I wouldn't have thought that was a standard insurance policy.
Yes. So one of the areas of coverage under the policy is hardware replacement. Appreciate this is more software, but it falls in the same bracket. If it's more efficient for us as an insurer to replace the hardware than it is to repair and restore, then that's what we would look to do in a claim scenario.
You're talking about replacing the server?
Yes. Yeah.
You haven't mentioned any sort of cost of this service.
No, apologies, I haven't. We can touch on that, yes.
It would be really useful to have some idea of cover, size of company, throughput, size of bank account, cost, etc.
Okay, I can certainly talk about the premium or the pricing where we start in terms of coverage, if that helps. When you talk about throughput of funds, do you mean what we see in terms of businesses, or?
Yes, exactly.
So we'll start off with the pricing part. So the coverage that we provide, it falls into two parts. I spoke about earlier the synergy between cyber and privacy and crime, and they're two separate modules. So cyber and privacy starts at £500 plus tax and our fee at CFC. And you can then add the cybercrime aspect on top of that. The cybercrime also starts at £500 plus tax. The reason for those starting premiums is the extent of the expertise and incident response team that we've got sat behind the products that I've spoken about today. We're one of only two providers in the UK who have that. I can't talk about other insurers and their setup, but hopefully that gives an idea today of certainly what we provide as a company. In terms of the type of companies that we will look to provide coverage for, it's really wide-ranging. I've spoken about a couple of examples there. We can provide coverage for financial institutions, from insurers to brokers to banks. We can provide coverage for all sorts of professions, healthcare facilities of all kinds, retailers, contracting firms. So if there are any that you'd like to query, I'm more than happy to take those questions. But we do take into account, if you're looking at the crime aspect, sorry, you mentioned about the throughput of funds for the business. So there are certain industries, for example, where we will want to know how much is being transferred in and out of the business, because the revenue won't account for that. So if I use the example of a wealth management business where they hold assets under management for the client, and there'll be frequent transfers in and out, that is something that we would account for in terms of the exposure when we're looking at that crime aspect.
You mentioned GDPR earlier.
Yes.
And as you know, the maximum fine is 4% of global turnover. Are you seeing bigger requests for bigger policies? I work in IT. Many of our customers, because of GDPR, primarily because of it, are asking now for 5 million, even 10 million pound insurance policies. Are you seeing that reflected in the industry? Yes,
certainly. So we are starting to see contractual requests coming through. We would always look at a business's revenue as an indicator, I guess, to start with, of the conversation with insurance brokers as to what kind of limits you should hold as a business. We have seen some instances where actually businesses have a smaller revenue than the insurance limit they're required to hold. which is why we try and delve into that to understand why that's the case. But yes, we certainly are seeing an increase in that. It's still, I would say at the moment, it's still a small proportion of the inquiries we see. But there are some requirements out there, I would say within local government contracts or for particular banks, for example, that those higher limits, 5-10 million limits and above are held.
Yeah. You mentioned the case where the client was possibly trying to fix it themselves. Is there any policy stipulation as regards timescales when you have to notify an incident to yourself?
No.
Cybercrime, for example.
No, absolutely not. So I think what I'd like to say is it's absolutely fine for customers to use maybe IT providers they already have if they have the expertise to and knowledge and know your networks better, for example, than our panel. So that's absolutely fine. There is no time requirements in that respect. Obviously, the later a claim's notified, you can see what impact that has. At the minute, if we're focusing on cybercrime in the UK, one thing that's happening here is the use of faster payment services, or FPS, within the banking industry. That means if you transfer funds, it's probably almost certain that if it's gone to the wrong bank account and it's UK to UK, those funds will be gone in less than 24 hours. So if you transfer funds out and you don't realise or whether it's gone to a third party it's not intended, it's likely to be lost very quickly. If we're seeing a UK business transfer to somewhere within the EU or further abroad, what happens is there's sort of a 3-4 day delay. That sometimes gives us the opportunity, if you're made aware of it, to actually then freeze the account, working with the police or other agencies across the globe, and actually try and retrieve some of those funds. But in the UK at the minute, that is why we see such a large proportion of cybercrime claims. In fact, we see a higher frequency of crime claims per UK customer than we do in the US, Australia or Canada. And we have significant client bases out there as well. As I say, faster payment services is a part of that at the minute. What we should see is in the next couple of months, I believe, that they're going to use the name of the intended recipient to actually add an extra layer of security around that. I think once that's in place, that will certainly help to stem the tide of some of that activity. Is that all right? Sorry, did that answer the question? Is that all right?
Do you come in and audit somebody's IT system to be able to give them a cost of insurance?
So I think we would use the tools that we have access to, like the BitSite report, or for larger, more complex networks, employ the services of hackers. We wouldn't come in so much to audit the system. The reason we wouldn't do that is because we think we provide an easy approach in terms of purchasing. We don't ask the risk management questions up front for you as a customer if you're beneath that 50 million revenue bracket. The reason we don't is because I think a lot of the technical terms that are used can confuse many, and ultimately we don't want to tie back whether a claim is going to be paid to whether actually the understanding of the question has been interpreted correctly. So we've tried to provide more of an easy access to coverage as opposed to the long list of questions and application forms that you see, or providing the upfront assessments.